All right, welcome to the final day for IMX Virtual. We're happy to have you here. It's been a great couple of days, and hope everyone's had an opportunity to see some of the sessions thus far. We have another busy day today. Lots of good opportunities to learn more, and of course, the exhibit floor is still open. So please go and visit with our exhibitors and sponsors. We could not be doing this without them. It's something we can offer you for free because of that. This session is sponsored by Simplex. And without further ado, we're very honored to have this panel. Subchapter M, of course, is one of the biggest things the industry's been facing. And we have some experts to help run through it. Caitlin Stewart is the Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs for AWO. Caitlin, thank you so much, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Spence. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. As Spence said, I'm Caitlin Stewart, and I'm really honored to have been asked by the Waterways Journal to moderate this discussion led by these expert panelists that we have with us. To give all of us an idea of who makes up our audience this morning and to help us adjust the dialogue accordingly, I am going to launch a poll that will appear on your screens right now. And while I continue, I'd ask that you please take a moment to tell us whether you're with a vessel operator, with a third-party organization, with the Coast Guard, or with another organization. I expect that whoever you are, if you're with us today, you know that July 20th, 2020 marked 2 years since the implementation of the towing vessel inspection regulations at 46 CFR Subchapter M, and the halfway point in the 4-year phase-in period for existing towing vessels to obtain certificates of inspection. For the next 50 minutes or so, our panelists will be sharing with us the lessons they've learned since 2018, how they've navigated this year's very unique challenges, and what they see on the road ahead. Each of them will be speaking from their unique vantage point, from the Coast Guard perspective, responsible for interpreting and enforcing the regulations, from the vessel operator perspective, responsible for maintaining compliance with the regulations, and from the perspective of a third-party organization responsible for verifying compliance with the regulations on behalf of the Coast Guard. So in a moment, I will introduce them and ask them to share some opening thoughts and their top lesson learned with us to get our conversation started. Once each of them has had an opportunity to speak, we will move on to the Q&A. If you have a question at any point during the proceedings, please type it into the Q&A panel so that I can direct it to our panelists. Let's take this opportunity to close the poll and review the poll results. It looks like 16% of the people who are with us operate towing vessels, own or operate towing vessels. 30% work for a TPO, and 3% work for the Coast Guard, and half of the audience, a little over half of the audience that's with us, works for another organization. So thanks again for taking the time to participate in that poll. I will now introduce our first panelist, Captain Tracy Phillips, who has served as the 8th Coast Guard District's, Chief of Prevention since last year, and was previously the Prevention Department Head of Sector New Orleans. In her distinguished Coast Guard career, Captain Phillips has also served as the Chief of the Tank Vessel and Offshore Division at the Marine Safety Center, the Chief of the Inspections Division at Sector San Francisco, and as a Naval Architect at the Office of Design and Engineering Standards at Coast Guard Headquarters. Captain Phillips, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction, Caitlin, and thank you for the opportunity to be a participant here at IMX 2020. I wanted to start off today and just set the stage for the panel and talk to you about where we are with our implementation of Subchapter M. So, Coast Guard wide, the Coast Guard has issued over 2,300 certificates of inspection, COIs, and within the 8th Coast Guard District, so the 8th Coast Guard District covers all of the Gulf Coast from Texas across to the western edge of the Panhandle of Florida, and then it includes all the inland rivers up to just below Chicago and out into partway up through Minnesota. That's the 8th Coast Guard District, and within there, our towing vessel fleet is over 3,600 vessels, and so far we've issued 1,615 COIs. As you can see on the screen, that's about 44% of our COI completion rate. That is below the 50% mark where we should have been in July of this year. And so we're working on getting those numbers up to the 50% mark. The breakdown of those certificates of inspection is about 3/4. You can see at the bottom of the slide, about 3/4 of those have been using the third party option, and the remaining 25% Coast Guard option. On the next slide, we break things down by the Coast Guard unit that issued the certificates of inspection. This gives you a picture of how the work has been spread out across the 8th District. On the top row, those are all of our coastal units, Coast Guard units, and on the bottom row, those are our inland river units. So looking across the top row, you'll see that the top 3 units that have issued certificate of inspection, MSU Homa has issued the most with 265 certificates of inspection, and Sector New Orleans is close behind with 206. Houston Galveston has issued 165 COIs, and these numbers incorporate everything from July of 2018 through the beginning of this week. We pulled the numbers right at the beginning of this week. On the bottom row, you can see that with the inland units, Paducah, Sector Upper Mississippi River, and Sector Ohio Valley have the highest numbers of certificates of inspection that have been issued. It's interesting, if you have some time and can look at the details, you'll see that different units have different distributions of third-party option and Coast Guard option. For example, if you look at the rivers, you'll see that MSU Pittsburgh has about a 50-50 split of Coast Guard option and third-party option, while MSU Paducah, almost all of their certificates of inspection they've issued have been under the third-party option. On the last slide, I have some information about the detentions that have been issued in the 8th Coast Guard District from the starting point in July of 2018 through now. There's been a total of 72 detentions, and detentions are issued when the Coast Guard identifies a substandard condition on the vessel. We determine that the vessel is unsafe to get underway because it poses a serious threat to life, property, or the marine environment. Of those 72 detentions, we've been tracking how many of those deficiencies are considered detainable deficiencies, which really kind of brings me to the first lesson learned, and that's the fact that over half of our detainable deficiencies, so our serious threats that we've identified during these inspections, have been related to fire safety. This could be anything from missing fire equipment, a fired extinguishing equipment that hasn't been serviced, or a fire extinguishing system that's out of date, or fire safety can also be related to fire hazards. So if you have bare electrical wires that are in an environment where there's oil or there could be potential sparks, you could relate that to fire safety as well. So if you are preparing a vessel for a Coast Guard inspection, this is a great area to start your inspection or start your pre-work to make sure you're prepared for that inspection. Those were the things that I wanted to cover to kick it off, and I'll turn it back to Caitlin to introduce the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Captain Phillips. I am going to, bear with me for just a second. Sorry, got a little bit of technical difficulties here as I'm trying to pull up my outline. Thank you, Captain Phillips, very much for those opening remarks. As I introduce our next panelist, I am going to launch our next poll. So again, please take a moment to tell us. Captain Phillips told us a little bit about the breakdown between Tpos option and Coast Guard option in the 8th District. I would ask that those of you in the audience give us a sense for whether you are using the Coast Guard or the Tpos option if you work for a company that owns or operates towing vessels. So again, as I introduce Mary Mccarthy, our next panelist, please take a moment to answer that poll. Mary is celebrating 10 years at Canal Barge Company, where she is the Director of Safety and Quality Systems. Congratulations, Mary.
Thanks.
He is the president and founder of Admiralty, a networking group for young people in the maritime industry, and is engaged in a number of industry associations, including serving as a former chair of AWO's Interregion Safety Committee. So Mary, please share with us your opening thoughts and your top lesson learned over the past 2 years.
Thanks, Caitlin, and hi, everybody. Just to give you a little bit of background on Canal, or a little bit of info, because I think it'll help understand kind of where I'm coming from with my remarks. We operate 34 towing vessels in the river system from Brownsville, Texas to Pascagoula-ish, Mississippi, and then all the way up the river system to Chicago and also Pittsburgh. We operate other places as well, but that's kind of the primary operating area. We also have a wholly owned subsidiary, Illinois Marine Towing, that's a harbor services provider in the Chicago area. That's about a dozen vessels. And so we have 2 Tposes. We're a Tpos-based company, and we have 2 Tposes. And so really the biggest lesson learned from SubM the last couple of years is that it worked. I think it was a little bit of an experiment. We had high confidence in the experiment, but it was a different approach. And I think we all were kind of wondering what the day-to-day would be like. And the good news is that the day-to-day is working. It was definitely a big part of my job for several years to kind of make sure that we were compliant with everything and had everything up to snuff. And I feel like it's another important thing on my list every day, and the list of a lot of other folks here, but that it has kind of become SOP and wrapped into our operations. So the biggest benefit, obviously, is the flexibility. And because of the challenging nature of this year, we have gotten really creative in kind of our charter situations that we didn't used to. So we've been chartering boats in between Canal Barge and IMT, and they're separate companies and separate Tposes. So they're proper charters that we have to execute. And I feel like every couple of weeks, my operations and commercial group comes to me with a new puzzle of how to figure out if boats moving where and all of that, especially as the Illinois River closed and is closed for several months. So which was anticipated, but it just made us get really creative. And SubM has absolutely been flexible enough to handle that, and our TPO as well, which is TBIB, but we also do work with Sabine to do our surveys. And so we kind of work with a lot of the TPOs as well, and just the ability to have a new situation and kind of roll with the punches, really. Has been something that we were hoping for, and has absolutely played out in kind of even new ways than we even really thought of. So that's really the biggest lesson learned. And I think the other benefit is also that the Coast Guard, we operate through a lot of sectors, as you can imagine, based on what I just told you about our operating profile, and that consistently throughout the sectors, the kind of acknowledgement that working with the TPO is the easiest way. The Coast Guard, and for companies, they're the experts. They're liaisons. They really are, I think, who both groups lean on to kind of really help facilitate this, and who have that bird's eye view of what's happening with the whole industry and can draw on that experience to help us in our kind of specific circumstances that we're working through. So that's really the biggest lesson learned. The experiment works, and I'm sure we'll continue to throw, and the world will continue to throw new situations at it, but pretty confident that it's going to continue to work for us as a model. And that's really it, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Mary. Appreciate that. So let's take just a minute to review the results of our last poll. It looks like we've got 70% of folks who don't work for a company that owns or operates towing vessels, but of the remaining 30%, we have 7% with us today who are using the Coast Guard option, and 22% who are using the Tpos option. So thanks again for your responses to that poll. Our third panelist is Tava Foray, who became the president of the Towing Vessel Inspection Bureau, or TVIB, this July. Congratulations, Tava. She previously served as TVIB's executive vice president of operations, and before that was the president of quality auditing and the vice president of regulatory affairs for the Action Group. So Tava, can you tell us about TVIB and about your top lesson learned in the implementation of Subchapter M?
Sure thing. Thanks, Caitlin. I want to thank you as our moderator, of course, and Spence, the Waterways Journal, and the rest of our panelists here. Great opportunity to present with each of you. TVIB is a 501c6 nonprofit trade organization that provides training and certification services for the marine auditors and surveyors, as well as a Coast Guard approved TPO. we represent just north of 100 vessels that are operated by 90 different TPO customers, and about 73% of them are AWO RCP certified. We've trained and certified just a little north of 110 or so auditors and surveyors that operate and offer their services along the inland waterways system, both the east and west coast, as well as the Gulf Coast. And I would say for us, the most significant lesson learned at this point has been the communication, the importance of communication between Coast Guard, the TPO, and the operators as well. And I really want to just kind of focus my comments on three specific areas for communication. The first one being COI application and processing. We have seen inconsistencies between audits, survey, and Coast Guard inspection results, and how those can create issues or concerns for all parties when applying for COIs. It also comes down to whether or not the information was consistent with what is on the COD. Manning is another area that continues to be an issue in that, as Mary pointed out, vessels can work different routes on different days. Honestly, they can be on different crewing requirements. All of these can be impacted by charter agreements, things along those lines. And so all the considerations for manning when you get ready to apply for the COI are fairly critical. Another area for manning, and we've seen this come up more recently, is my vessel's at the dock. So is it in service or out of service? If auditors, surveyors, repairs, minor repairs are being made, do we have to maintain compliance with the COI, or because we're at dock, or is it different? And so those are the kind of the questions that we seem to field on a regular basis. And so really planning ahead for the various circumstances that can occur. The next area is handling of 835s, sort of the old adage that just when you think you know the answers, they change the questions. And that really rings true, unfortunately, and we saw this past June, July with the changeover at the units. It smoothed out pretty quickly, but it seems like with each changeover, you kind of got to learn and get a feel for the new flavor of those coming in. We do continue to see some issues with inconsistencies in coding COIs, and I think most of the TPOs have talked about this and addressed this with the Coast Guard. And we did see some significant improvements last year after the COE hosted the CID conference up in Paducah. So kind of where we sit today is we understand that there's an internal policy that if there's no COI on the vessel, that the Coast Guard will retain responsibility for closing that out. But we still see some units will code it to the Coast Guard, some will code it to the TPO, some will do both. Where we've gotten the biggest gains, I would say, is when there's additional verbiage in those findings that are specific to outline the expectation of the TPO. That's helpful for both us and the operator. And lastly, audit notifications. With the local OCMI, specifically how operational considerations can impact the original or the required 72-hour notification, and how things can change from the original notification, where we've had a vessel that was in one OCMI, and by the time they were ready for the audit, they've moved to another OCMI. So we have some operators that will actually notify multiple units at the same time and alert them that the vessel is in transit and so on and so forth. But those are our primary areas that we have found where communication is key. Thank you.
Thank you, Tava. Really appreciate that rundown. Our next panelist and our fourth and final panelist is Robert Keister, who is the Vice President of Staging Surveyors. Robert retired from the Coast Guard after 20 years of service in the Marine Inspection and Prevention Program, and was Vice President of Vessel Compliance at Harvey Gulf International Marine, and Manager of Vessel Compliance and Manager of Operations for Signet Maritime's Pascagoula fleet prior to joining Sabine in 2016. So Robert, what would you tell us about Sabine and about your top lesson learned since Subchapter M took effect?
Thank you and good morning. Sabine Surveyors is another TPO. We have 8 offices along the Gulf Coast. We're a traditional marine inspection and surveying company. So we do a lot of other things other than Subchapter M, but we became a TPO. We have 6 dedicated surveyors and auditors. That's all they do is Subchapter M work. We don't use any contractors. Currently, we have a little over 360 vessels on contract, and we've had about 190 COIs issued to our vessels. So, that's a little stat about Subchapter or Sabine and Subchapter M. Tava's already pretty much covered the whole communications portion of it. I mean, there's lots of different issues and lessons learned with communication. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was the fact that, for the Tpos option vessels and Tpos option companies to really succeed, the most important thing that we're seeing right now is the internal audit program. Without that internal audit program and a strong internal audit program, the Tpos option is not going to succeed because the TPO is only on that vessel potentially once every 5 years. So, the eyes on the vessels through the internal audit program and the scrutiny that an internal audit program puts on each vessel is key to the whole program working on the Tpos side. So on the Coast Guard side, the Coast Guard will be on the vessel every year. It'll be just like a traditional Coast Guard inspection. So annually, those vessels will get ready for the Coast Guard inspection and hopefully do well. But for the Tpos side, I really believe, and we really push and kind of scrutinize a little extra the internal audit program of every company, because that's the way that the company is going to maintain a high level of performance and improve all their operations. So that was my focus. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Robert. That is indeed an excellent lesson learned for all of us. So I'm going to begin our Q&A with a couple of questions of my own, but just a reminder to those of you in the audience, if you have a question for any of our panelists this morning, please go ahead and type it into the chat or into the Q&A panel, and we will be happy to take those as they come in. So my first question, I think I'm going to direct to Tava and Robert, since I think Mary touched on this in her opening remarks, but certainly, Mary, if there's anything you'd like to add, we'll come back to you. So Tava, why don't you tell us, how has the process of certificating towing vessels, in your view, improved over the first 2 years of the COI phase-in period due to the application of lessons learned? And then we'll go to Robert.
I would say, and I would really point back to communication and specifically relationships. One of the things that we really try to highlight with our operators is the need to develop relationships with the local unit long before you send the application in. Each unit has some autonomy to request some documentation or items that might look different from the other units that you've dealt with. So it's really imperative that you start that conversation beforehand, find out what their expectations are, and then work to meet those expectations. We have found that when we know these things going in, that the application process just goes that much smoother for everybody concerned. I don't think anybody seeks to make it difficult or cumbersome. But knowing the ground rules before going in seems to help quite a bit.
Thanks, Tava. Robert?
Yeah, I would agree that understand the expectations of the Coast Guard. Their biggest thing is loading all the data for the vessels into missile, and it seemed like at the beginning, each unit was asking for a little bit of different paperwork here, a little bit different interpretation of different information that was required. So I think over the last 2 years, for pretty much, at least in the 8th district, everything has become much more consistent. And consistency when implementing a new program is by far the most important thing. As long as everybody's kind of doing the same thing, we can deal with it. There are still some units out there, particularly on the East Coast, that aren't as consistent as everybody else, and we as a TPO try to work with them and try to explain to them that the 8th district is doing it this way and they're succeeding. Maybe you can learn from them. But the biggest thing is things are becoming more consistent, and with consistency comes a lot more ease across the board.
Absolutely. Mary, is there anything that you'd like to add about the improvement in the certification process over the first half of the COI phase-in period?
Sure. I think one of our issues we didn't anticipate at first was, I totally agree that developing that relationship in advance with the sector really helps, but we operate so many places that we weren't really sure where we were going to get our COIs. And because of the decal policy letter that allows vessels with decals, the unit, sector unit has the discretion to not necessarily have to board that boat to do the inspection if they choose. We decided actually to get the majority of our COIs out of sector lower because we have 2 port captains based in Memphis. And so we ended up getting a lot of decals out of Memphis. And so the folks who we were dealing with the COI applications were the ones who had physically already been on our boats a year or 2 years prior. And so once we kind of nailed down exactly what they needed, which did kind of somewhat vary from sector to sector, but I think has become more consistent since then, it was kind of like night and day, so much easier once we kind of settled on that, where we had those folks who had familiarity with the majority of our equipment. So that was the biggest kind of thing that we worked through. And that the decal program, I just can't say enough about it because it was a conversation each time. It wasn't like, oh, we know you, we've seen a few of your boats. Here's a bunch of COIs. It was each time we sent an application, kind of walk through. Oh yeah, I was on that, or that other guy was on it. I think we have some photos, or I pulled up the report and missile, or that kind of thing. So that's what I appreciate. It was kind of risk-based conversation each time, not something that anyone really felt like bound to. So you have to do it this way or that way. That we have that flexibility. So I think it's been going very smoothly lately.
That's great. Thank you. My next question is a 2-parter for Captain Phillips. The first part is, can you share some of the things that you and your team are working on to improve the implementation of Subchapter M and D8? And the second part is, can you talk a little bit about what types of enforcement activity are occurring in the 8th District?
Absolutely. So I'm really pleased to hear Rob say that he's seen an improvement in consistency over the last 2 years, because really our work to try and improve the implementation of Subchapter M has been focused on consistency. So that's really good to hear. Over the last year, we've done a couple of different things. So starting out, we created a District 8 Commander's Intent. And the purpose of this document was to send it out to our Coast Guard field units. We wanted to lay out the expectations for them, and it covered a wide range of topics, things like new construction, the interactions with the Tpos, the use of decals, whether those decals were expired or not, and how that should factor into their decision on whether to attend the vessel. So we laid that out, and that helped set some expectations for our field units. As Tava mentioned, we held a training back in February for all of our chief of inspections from all the different units that work on Subchapter M. And that was a great session to bring together everybody, encourage some discussions, and try to ensure everybody was approaching things the same way. We also issued, as I'm sure a lot of you have seen, a policy letter on navigation lights and day shapes on inland towing vessels. So that's another area we focused on to work on improving Subchapter M. We're still doing a couple of things to try and continue with those improvements. We started last year, and we're continuing to do regular calls with our field units to discuss Subchapter M. We are right now in the process of preparing some case studies to send out to those field units. Things to talk about examples of situations and how we in the 8th District expect them to respond to those types of situations, in the hopes that by giving them examples, it helps them in their future decisions. And we're also participating in AWO's Quality Action Team, and we're working with them to discuss various topics that need some focus on consistency. Moving to the second part of the question, to talk about enforcement. So over the last year, once we hit the 25% mark, we started doing a detailed look at vessels and trying to determine if they did not meet if the company did not meet the 25% mark, why that was. In some cases, it was because vessels were not required to meet Subchapter M. In some cases, it was because a vessel was laid up and we just didn't have that tracked in our system. But in other cases, the company was out of compliance, and so there were a number of 835s issued, and we asked those vessels to either give us a plan for how they were going to obtain their certificate of inspection, or we told them that they should hold at the dock until they gave us that plan or got their certificate of inspection. We've done a number of, we've taken a number of actions, and I'll just give you a couple of examples when our inspectors have identified vessels that appear to be posing a really serious threat. We've taken a couple different actions. So in one case, there was a vessel that had serious wastage in the structural members and the hull of the vessel. And we worked with the company, and eventually the company decided to scrap that vessel. In another case, there was a vessel that was in very poor condition. The equipment wasn't up to date. There was a lot of safety concerns and a lot of hazards, and the company elected to take that vessel out of service, and they don't plan to return that vessel to service. There was an example where one of our field units found a vessel that was operating without a certificate of documentation. And so the Coast Guard unit, that vessel didn't have a certificate of inspection yet, but the Coast Guard unit issued a captain of the port order that required that vessel to stay at the dock until they obtained a certificate of documentation. And then there's been a couple of cases where a vessel has not been in compliance, and we decided to issue some notices of violation. Right now, we're continuing our ongoing look at what other vessels may not be in compliance with the requirements to have COIs. So in July, we passed the mark for 50%, and so our focus has shifted to explore and look at the companies that don't appear to be in compliance with the 50% mark, and making sure that we track those down and identify either that the information in our database is not correct, or that the vessel is indeed out of compliance, and then we'll look at the situation and decide what to do from there.
Thanks, Captain Phillips. Before we get to questions from the audience, I just have a follow-up question for you. Thank you, first of all, for your team's efforts to enhance consistency and to enforce the requirements. We know that 50% was the threshold for operators of multi-vessel fleets to obtain COIs as of July 20th. Single vessel operators, on the other hand, were required to obtain their certificate of inspection for their vessel as of that date. So how many single vessel operators have received their COIs, and how has that sort of impacted the workload for inspectors in D8?
So Coast Guard wide, our information shows that there's about 488 single vessel operators, and so far 123 of those have received COIs. Within the 8th district, the number is 308 total, with 66 being issued COIs thus far. And so the other vessels that do not appear to have COIs, those are kind of a big portion of our list of vessels that we're checking on right now. In some cases, our vessel, we're tracking this by the owner of the vessel. And in some cases, maybe an owner owns a single vessel, but the vessel is being operated by a multi-vessel company, in which case maybe that vessel isn't actually required to have a COI yet when you track it by the operator. So we're going through and looking at those numbers right now.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, so we have a question from Dave Murray. He has asked, how has COVID-19 affected the inspection process by both the Coast Guard and Tpos? So let's start with the Tpos. Let's start with Tava. Why don't you tell us how COVID-19 has impacted your activity this year with respect to inspections or audits and surveys?
We ran some numbers earlier about a month or so ago. So in 2019, we in the period from January to June, we had run 140 audits, and 229 surveys. In that same period of this year, we dropped down to 82 audits and 195 surveys. So we saw a 41% drop in the number of audits, which we attribute to the COVID situation, and about a 15% drop in the number of surveys. But where we've seen sort of the uptick is when the Coast Guard released the policy letter that allows for virtual activities and or extensions. And so we have had 186 what we call COVID-19 requests, and those are broken down by 60 virtual activity requests and 120 extensions. The biggest thing that we really try to point out with the extensions is for the operator to still try to conduct that or have that activity conducted as close to the original deadline as is possible. Because what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for a very protracted timeline on the next cycle. So the next year, you don't get to push those dates 12 months from the previous event. It's generally tied to the COI date. So while extensions are out there and they're available, they're, again, try to do those events as close to the original date as possible.
Thanks, Tava. Robert?
For us, we definitely had a slowdown of all audits and surveys at the beginning of the whole pandemic. We did do some virtual audits. We didn't do any virtual surveys. We felt, and most of our customers felt, that the virtual audits didn't lend themselves real well to getting a complete audit done on the vessel. So, we pretty much we're not doing any more virtual audits either. But again, most of our companies, they either ask for extensions or just push their surveys and audits to the end of the grace period so that they can get them all in. We have a few that are still lagging and we have to catch up on. But again, with masks and social distancing and limiting the amount of time you have inside the wheel, in the wheelhouse and then inside the vessel itself, we've been able to pretty much continue on doing our surveys and audits.
Thanks, Robert. Captain Phillips, both Tava and Robert alluded to Coast Guard policy that allows for virtual audits and surveys, or allows for the flexible use of virtual audits and surveys. Can you tell us a little bit about that guidance, and also just about how the pandemic has impacted the way that the Coast Guard approaches its work?
Absolutely. The Coast Guard primarily still looks to conduct in-person inspections, but we do have options for some virtual inspections or remote inspections. That could be anything from asking for a video to document something below decks so that the Coast Guard inspectors don't have to go inside the hull of the ship, or we could ask for some paperwork documentation ahead of the inspection so that we don't have to spend as much time on board, or we could ask for a video to demonstrate that drills or other activities are being conducted. The good thing is, with so much of a portion of our fleet using the third-party option, the number of Coast Guard inspections is not as high as what the work that's being conducted by the Tpos. The Coast Guard inspectors typically will address an inspection on a case-by-case basis and look at all the factors involved before they make a decision about whether to conduct a remote inspection or not.
Thank you for that. Mary, you said that Canal has had to get creative this year as a result of COVID. Can you talk a little bit more? Anything that you'd like to highlight for the audience with respect to the way that the pandemic has changed your compliance approach with respect to Subchapter M?
Sure, definitely have gotten creative, and I feel like Jennifer Carpenter when I say this, we're using a hybrid approach. We have had a lot of success, especially with virtual audits. I really feel like COVID is all about silver linings, I think, as we've all learned. And the silver lining is that the preparation for a virtual audit or survey is just a lot more extensive than what we used to do for an in-person. We would do some prep over the phone. We try to catch the boat beforehand. really just because there's been so many changes in the safety management system that we want to, we're here to support especially our captains, but all the crew on board when they're going through an audit or a survey to really demonstrate that they know all the safety procedures. That's kind of what it's really all about. So our job is to support them. So we kind of always have helped them make sure that they feel comfortable and ready for whatever compliance activity is. But the virtual piece has kind of required us to do a lot more time on the phone with them and in a safe way when they're stopped or, able to, if they have a steersman and they're kind of two folks in the wheelhouse and we can kind of work with them. That has just been a huge boon. We feel like we've been able to really coach and educate them, have time for them to ask us questions. And because of we adopted a kind of a better onboard documentation organization tool called Ignite that kind of just looks like any files that you have on your computer, but we can see them obviously from the office and we can be changing things in real time. Oh, you're missing this file. Let me bring it over. And then they see it right away. And then we, of course, have our electronic preventive maintenance system. Let's look up things in that. And just, man, the silver lining of that, I think our captains feel more supported and feel more comfortable, like they can answer all these questions. We feel like they have a greater knowledge of it. And we are not going out to the boats as often because of COVID. So it's kind of replaced our in-person activities. So that's really been the biggest lesson learned. It's been a huge benefit to us. That being said, you got to do some things in person. And so kind of our COVID protocols that we had to use for when a tech gets on board or any other kind of like critical required people getting physically on board the boat, really with the crew being that gatekeeper for making sure all those precautions are followed, and us kind of making sure that whoever's getting on board for especially a survey before a COI, you got to do that in person. I know that's not allowed, but we wouldn't even feel comfortable getting a COI without any kind of condition inspection. That's really the foundation. So we obviously have been doing those and some other activities as well in person, and those haven't gone well, really especially targeted at like what's the business need to, like where do we really need to be doing these activities, and just have more risk-based approach when we are going to introduce another vector on board. So it has required us to get creative, but I know that we will continue this model moving forward of kind of more interactive coaching on board. And I think that there is a place for virtual activities in the future. But I think we're all looking forward to the time when we can have folks physically on board the vessels, because that's really a great way to also have that interaction and learning by our crews. So that's been our experience.
Thanks, Mary. Another question for you. You have talked a little bit about sort of the hurdles that you've overcome, but I'm wondering, as you kind of look ahead, what's the most significant issue you're currently working to resolve to facilitate sub-end implementation for Canal?
It's actually already been brought up by Tpos and Captain Phillips, the 835 issue. I just, was thinking about when they were talking about it earlier, and it really is a human issue. You take an incident that is probably in the middle of the night on Christmas or something, right? Because that's when it always happens. And you've got someone on call, it's whoever is on call, both from our port captain standpoint, our port engineer standpoint. We get whoever over at the Coast Guard is on duty at the time. Our TPO rotates call. And then we, of course, have, over 100 wheelmen. So at any one of those at any given time. You kind of mix that up with an incident, and it's tough. It's really tough. I'm really very happy with our collaboration that we're having between the Coast Guard and AWO to try to crack this code, because we need to support those folks who are dealing with it in the middle of the night from company standpoint and from the Coast Guard standpoint, so that they know what to do. But what I think we've also learned is that we do need to get them flexibility to kind of talk it out, because it's going to be a different situation each time, really. And so that kind of process they can lean on, so that there's some things that are just understood that you don't have to work through, but also the flexibility, depending on what's going on, that they can, we can just talk it out and agree what we got to do, is really the biggest issue that we're dealing with. I would also say new construction. We built a new boat that launched in April, our COVID boat that launched in the middle of the pandemic, at the beginning of it, really. And then we're building another one. And so I would say that's not really an issue. It's actually been very smooth. I think it was new. We thought it would be a bigger issue, but I really think drawing on some of the experience from other inspected, we have folks who are helping us who have handled other inspected vessel classes for longer. And so that has really helped us. So we can maybe talk about more of that later if people have new construction questions, but that's one the other thing as well. Also, energy efficiency, we have our lights on a timer.
There you are. Thank you, Mary. We've had a question come in from Lori Thomas. She says, for Captain Phillips, has the Coast Guard established policies for conducting virtual audits? Can you tell us a little bit about MSIB 820, which I think is the guidance document that's relevant to this?
Right. So we have given the field units the option to conduct some virtual inspections. But as I mentioned before, we are treating that on a case-by-case basis, and we ask the field units to look at the overall picture before they decide whether they're going to conduct a virtual inspection. So where is that inspection occurring? What is the rate of COVID transmission in that area? What are the risks to the inspectors? What are the risks to the crews on board that vessel? Once you understand all of that, what activities are they going to be conducting while they're on board? What is the layout of the vessel? Does it require an extended period in a confined space? Once you understand that picture, then you can look at what are the risks posed by the vessel? Have we been on board the vessel before? And what are the things that might be mitigating or other extenuating circumstances which may allow us to say, this is a lower risk situation, we can conduct a virtual inspection, or we are concerned that we haven't had eyes on this vessel before, we don't understand this company, or we have history with this company and we want to be on board. So we take all those factors into consideration when we're deciding whether to do a virtual inspection.
Thanks for that additional information. And the Coast Guard has also authorized auditors and surveyors to consider the approval of, or to use virtual tools for their events as well. I know that both you, Robert, and you, Tava, mentioned that before. Is there anything that you would like to add to what you had previously said about the use of virtual tools for audits and surveys? We'll start with Robert.
Like I said, we did a few of them. Like Mary said, our clients felt that it was so much more work to collect all the data and send all the data to us, and we could scrutinize it so much more that they actually kind of shied away from it after the first couple of them. And like Mary alluded to, there's still parts of the audit that we believe still need to be kind of a face-to-face thing. Now, yeah, you can do it with FaceTime or Teams or, all these Zoom and all these different other things. But, actually being there and conducting a fire drill is completely different than trying someone using their phones to FaceTime a fire drill. Or when you're interacting and interviewing a deckhand about what he knows about the Tpos and confined space entry and, who the DPA is. It works, but it doesn't work real well. No matter what platform you're using or what kind of equipment you're using, the signal to get down into the engine room, a cellular signal to get down in the engine room in some parts of the rivers is nearly impossible. So we had a lot of dropped calls and a lot of delays due to technical issues that it's part of the learning curve of virtual auditing and surveying. And we, in the end, between our, discussions with our clients and our surveyors and auditors, we just didn't feel it was the best thing for us.
Thank you. Tava, any additional thoughts?
I would say really the just to kind of piggyback on what Rob was referring to is that data gathering that in many ways is going to become a little bit of a silver lining. I think some auditors are recognizing that there's a future use of segmenting these activities so that maybe they do some of this data collection ahead of time, do a little bit of their homework before actually getting on board, and then they can use their time on board a little differently than maybe they have in the past. So that's some of what we think might be some positives to come out of this, some things that they've learned that they'll take into the future with them.
Thank you. I have one final question for Captain Phillips, and that is, we've talked a little bit about, or quite a bit about inconsistencies. And for those in the audience who may encounter an inconsistency in the way that the Coast Guard is interpreting a requirement from one unit to another, or the way that the Coast Guard is interpreting a requirement differently from a TPO, what do you recommend that audience member do?
Recommend communication. So that'll start with, if it's two different Coast Guard units that are interpreting something differently, I would recommend requesting that both units be joined into a teleconference or a meeting together to discuss it. To start out, the question that comes to my mind first is why? Ask why. So if one Coast Guard unit has a different interpretation than another Coast Guard unit, ask that Coast Guard unit, is there something different in this area that requires us to interpret this or approach this requirement differently? Maybe there is a unique operating situation in that particular area, and that's why the difference. If that doesn't work, if there continues to be a difference between Coast Guard units and there doesn't seem to be a path to resolve it, then I would recommend, if it's two Coast Guard units both within the 8th District, then please reach out to me or my staff so that we can take a look at the issue and identify why there's inconsistencies and what we should do. And then if that doesn't resolve it, everybody has the option to appeal. If it's a Coast Guard decision they're appealing, they can submit an appeal to the Coast Guard unit that made that decision, and then that appeal process allows you to elevate that up all the way to the headquarters level if you need it. If there's inconsistencies between a Coast Guard unit and a TPO, then I would recommend the same kind of approach. Start out communicating between the two organizations, see what the issues are, why there might be a difference in the interpretation. And then if you can't identify a resolution, let's elevate those communications up to the next level. Maybe we can bring in the Coast Guard's towing vessel National Center of Expertise. Maybe we can bring in our 8th District staff and discuss that and possibly, bring the issue up to the headquarters level to try and resolve it.
Thank you, Captain Phillips. That's very helpful. Unfortunately, it is time for us to bring our session to a close. The time really flies by. But Captain Phillips, Mary, Robert, Tava, thank you all so much for sharing your experience and your expertise with us. To those of you in the audience, thank you for tuning in and for your questions. I hope that you will join the next Subchapter M session on cost considerations from a shipyard perspective, which is going to begin in just a few minutes. And finally, thank you to the Waterways Journal for bringing us all together virtually for IMX 2020. Spence, anything you'd like to say to close us out?
Yeah, I want to thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. You were wonderful. You did a very good job, and thank you for all your preparation. And our panelists, it's a real pleasure to have you on. I want to remind the attendees that you have to log off of this to log on to the next session. There are 2 sessions coming up, one Subchapter M from a shipyard perspective, where there's going to be a lot of discussion on internal structural examinations and the dry dock usage that's going to be necessary coming up. And we also have a very good session, also at 10 o'clock, from Joseph Powell, who is recently a 40 under 40 award winner, and as I learned, top Secret Service agent. So he'll have a great presentation on vessel and facility security as well. So these sessions are going to be recorded, so whichever one you missed, you will be able to log on next week to view it. Again, thank you so much, Caitlin, and our panelists. Thank you very much, Captain Phillips. Thank you for the service.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.